Eleanor Grayson sat in her weathered armchair, the one with the frayed armrests that her late husband, George, had promised to fix before his heart gave out 15 years ago. The house was quiet now. Too quiet. The kind of silence that pressed against her ears like a heavy fog. At 78, her hands trembled slightly as she held a cup of lukewarm tea, the steam long gone. Her eyes, still sharp despite the years, drifted to the mantel where a row of framed photos stood like sentinels of a life she barely recognized anymore. There was Michael, her eldest, smiling with his wife and 2 kids in a photo from a Christmas she wasn't invited to. Next to it, a picture of Laura, her middle child. At her college graduation, Eleanor had paid for that degree, scrimping every penny from her pension. And then there was Tommy, the youngest, who hadn't called in 3 years. Not since he'd asked for a loan and she'd given him everything she had left in her savings. The photos were a gallery of absence, each one a reminder of the family who'd left her behind. Eleanor's life hadn't always been this hollow. She'd raised her 3 children in this very house, a modest 2-story in a quiet Ohio suburb. She'd bandaged scraped knees, stayed up late helping with homework, and worked double shifts at the diner to keep the lights on after George passed. Every sacrifice was a brick laid in the foundation of their future. Or so she thought. But somewhere along the way, her children had grown distant, their visits dwindling to perfunctory phone calls and half-hearted promises. "We'll come by next week, Mom," they'd say. But next week never came. The first crack appeared 5 years ago, when Michael sold the family cabin, the one George had built with his own hands without telling her. Eleanor had driven up to the lake one spring morning, hoping to sit by the water and feel George's presence, only to find a sold sign staked in the dirt. When she confronted Michael, he'd shrugged, his voice cold over the phone. "It's just a cabin, Mom. We needed the money." Needed it for what? A new car? A bigger house? Eleanor never asked, because the answer would have broken her heart even more. Laura was no better. She'd always been the ambitious one, the one who swore she'd make it big and take care of her mother. But when Eleanor had a hip replacement 2 years ago, Laura sent a card and a bouquet of flowers. Nothing more. No visit. No call to check if she could climb the stairs or afford her meds. Tommy, meanwhile, was a ghost. After taking her money, he'd vanished to some city out west, chasing dreams he never shared with her. The last she heard, he was figuring things out. Eleanor didn't know what that meant, but she knew it didn't include her. Tonight, though, was different. Tonight, they were coming. All 3 of them. Michael had called a week ago, his voice clipped and formal, saying they needed to talk about the future. Eleanor's heart had leapt, foolishly, at the thought of her children under one roof again. She'd spent days cleaning, dusting off the old dining table, and baking their favorite lemon pound cake. She'd even pulled out the good china, the set George had bought for their 10th anniversary. Maybe, she thought, this was their chance to start over. The doorbell rang, sharp and jarring in the quiet house. Eleanor smoothed her dress, her heart fluttering with a mix of hope and dread. She opened the door to find Michael, Laura, and Tommy standing on the porch, their faces unreadable. They stepped inside, their footsteps heavy, no one meeting her eyes. "Mom, we need to talk," Michael said, his voice flat. He didn't sit, didn't touch the cake she'd set out. Laura stood by the window, arms crossed, while Tommy slouched on the couch, scrolling through his phone. Eleanor forced a smile, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. "Of course. Honey, what's on your mind?" Michael cleared his throat, exchanging a glance with Laura. "We've been thinking about your situation. This house, it's too much for you to handle alone. And, well, We've talked it over, and we think it's time you moved into a facility. The word hit Eleanor like a slap. A facility. Her voice trembled, but she kept it steady. You mean a nursing home? It's not like that, Mom. Laura cut in, her tone sharp. It's a nice place. They'll take care of you. You won't have to worry about the house or bills or anything. Eleanor's chest tightened. This is my home. Your father built this place. We raised you here. It's not practical, Michael said, his voice harder now. You're getting older. You can't keep up with it. And honestly, the house is worth a lot. We could sell it, split the money, and make sure you're set. Split the money. Eleanor's voice cracked. You want to sell my home? For what? For us, Tommy said, finally looking up from his phone. We've got lives. Mom. Kids. Debts. Plans. You don't need all this space. Eleanor stared at them. Her children. The ones she'd poured her life into. They weren't here to reconnect. They were here to take what was left of her. The room spun. Her breath shallow. She wanted to scream. To throw them out. But her voice caught in her throat. Instead, she nodded, her hands trembling as she gripped the armrests of her chair. We'll handle the details, Michael said, already turning toward the door. We'll find a good place for you. It's for the best. They left as quickly as they'd come, their footsteps fading down the porch steps. Eleanor sat frozen, the lemon pound cake untouched, the good china gleaming under the dim light. For the first time in her life, she felt truly alone, not just abandoned, but discarded, like garbage. But something stirred in her, a spark of defiance she hadn't felt in years. They thought they could toss her aside, strip her of her home, her memories, her dignity. They were wrong. Eleanor Grayson wasn't done yet. If they wanted to treat her like trash, she'd show them what trash could do. Eleanor didn't sleep that night. The silence of the house, once a heavy weight, now felt like a challenge. Her children's words echoed in her mind facility. Sell the house. Split the money. Each phrase was a knife, carving away at the life she'd built. By dawn, her grief had hardened into something else, resolve. She wasn't the frail old woman they thought she was. She'd survived loss, scraped by on nothing, and raised them alone after George's death. If they thought they could shove her into a nursing home and sell her home out from under her, they were about to learn who Eleanor Grayson really was. She started small. Over the next few days, Eleanor combed through every corner of the house, cataloging what mattered. The dining table where she'd taught Laura to read. The backyard swing where Tommy had broken his arm at 6. The photo albums stacked in the attic, filled with memories her children had forgotten. She wasn't just protecting a house. She was guarding a legacy. But she wasn't naive. She knew her children wouldn't back down easily. If she wanted to keep her home, she'd need a plan and allies. Eleanor's first stop was the community center down the street. She'd volunteered there for years, teaching knitting classes and organizing book drives. Though she'd stopped after her hip surgery, the center was a lifeline for seniors like her, a place where stories were shared over coffee and card games. She walked in on a Tuesday morning, her cane tapping softly against the linoleum floor. The room buzzed with familiar faces. Ruth, who'd lost her husband to cancer. Harold, a retired lawyer with a sharp mind. And Maria, a former nurse who never minced words. Eleanor, where have you been? Ruth called, waving her over to a table where a half-finished puzzle lay scattered. We thought you'd forgotten us. Eleanor managed a smile, settling into a chair. Life got in the way, she said, her voice quieter than she intended. She hesitated, then told them everything: Michael's cold pragmatism, Laura's dismissive tone, Tommy's indifference. The words poured out. raw and unfiltered. And when she finished, the table was silent. "That's despicable," Maria said finally, her dark eyes flashing. "Your own kids, treating you like that. They ought to be ashamed. They don't see me as their mother anymore," Eleanor said, her voice steady despite the ache in her chest. "Just a problem to solve. They want to sell my house and put me in a home." Harold leaned forward, his glasses glinting under the fluorescent lights. "Do they have power of attorney? Any legal claim to the property?" Eleanor shook her head. "The house is in my name. George made sure of that. But they're my kids. I never thought I'd have to fight them." "You're not alone," Ruth said, reaching for Eleanor's hand. "We'll help you figure this out." Over the next week, the community center became Eleanor's war room. Harold dug into property laws, confirming that her children had no legal right to force a sale without her consent. Maria connected her with a social worker who specialized in elder rights, ensuring Eleanor's finances were protected. Ruth, ever practical, suggested Eleanor update her will and secure her assets. It was a crash course in self-preservation, and Eleanor soaked up every lesson. For the first time in years, she felt a flicker of control. But it wasn't enough to just protect herself. Eleanor wanted her children to understand what they'd done, to feel the weight of their betrayal. She wasn't vengeful by nature, but the spark of defiance in her had grown into a steady flame. She began to gather evidence not just of their neglect, but of her own contributions to their lives. Bank statements showing the money she'd given Tommy, receipts for Laura's tuition, even the deed to the cabin Michael had sold without her consent. She wasn't sure what she'd do with it all, but it felt like ammunition. One evening, as she sat sorting through old letters, the phone rang. It was Michael, his voice impatient. "Mom, we found a place for you. It's nice, really high-end. We need to start the process of selling the house. Can we come by tomorrow to talk?" Eleanor's grip tightened on the phone. She could hear the assumption in his voice, the certainty that she'd comply. "Tomorrow's fine," she said, her tone calm but firm. "But I'm not going anywhere. Michael, this is my home." There was a pause, then a huff of frustration. "Mom, be reasonable. You can't stay there alone. It's not safe." "I'm not alone," she said, thinking of Ruth, Harold, and Maria. "And I'm not the one who needs to be reasonable." She hung up before he could respond, her heart pounding. It was a small act of rebellion, but it felt monumental. For years, she'd let her children's neglect slide, excusing their absence, their selfishness. No more. If they wanted to treat her like garbage, she'd show them she was anything but. As she lay in bed that night, Eleanor thought of George. He'd always believed in her strength, even when she doubted herself. "You're tougher than you know, Ellie," he'd say, his hand warm on hers. She clung to that memory, letting it fuel her resolve. Tomorrow, when her children arrived, she'd be ready not just to defend her home, but to reclaim her dignity. They'd underestimated her for the last time. The next morning, Eleanor rose early, her body aching but her mind sharp. She dressed carefully, choosing a navy blue dress she'd worn to George's funeral, a symbol of her resilience. The dining room table was set with coffee and pastries. But this time, there was no lemon pound cake, no good china. This wasn't a reunion. It was a reckoning. Michael, Laura, and Tommy arrived at noon, their faces a mix of irritation and unease. Eleanor greeted them at the door, her expression calm but unyielding. "Come in," she said, leading them to the dining room. They sat, their postures stiff, as if sensing the shift in her demeanor. "Mom, let's make this quick," Michael began, pulling a folder from his briefcase. We've got the paperwork for the facility. It's a great place. Top-rated. And we've already got a realtor lined up for the house. Eleanor didn't flinch. She'd spent the morning with Harold, reviewing her rights, and with Maria, practicing what she'd say. I'm not signing anything, she said, her voice steady. This is my home, and I'm staying. Laura sighed, rolling her eyes. Mom, we've been over this. You can't manage alone. You're being stubborn. Stubborn. Eleanor's voice rose, sharp and clear. I raised you 3 on my own after your father died. I worked 16-hour days, paid for your school, your clothes, your dreams. And now you call me stubborn for wanting to keep the home we built together. Tommy shifted uncomfortably, his eyes on the floor. Michael leaned forward, his jaw tight. We're trying to help you, Mom. This house is a burden. The money from the sale could. Could what? Eleanor cut in. Pay for your new car. Your vacation. Or maybe Tommy's next big idea that never pans out. She pulled a stack of papers from a box beside her bank statements. Receipts. Letters. I've got proof of every penny I gave you. Laura. Your college tuition. Tommy. The $10,000 you swore you'd pay back. Michael. You sold your father's cabin without even telling me. And now you want to take my home. The room went silent, the air thick with tension. Laura's face flushed, but she didn't speak. Tommy muttered something under his breath, still avoiding her gaze. Michael's eyes narrowed. You're making this harder than it needs to be. No, Eleanor said, her voice low but fierce. You made it hard when you decided I was disposable. She pushed the papers toward them. I'm not going anywhere. And if you try to force me, I'll fight you with everything I've got. Michael scoffed, but there was a flicker of uncertainty in his eyes. You can't afford a lawyer. Mom, be realistic. I don't need to afford one, Eleanor said. I have friends who know the law. I have a community who cares about me. Can you say the same? The words hung in the air, heavy and unanswerable. For the first time, her children looked unsure, their confidence cracking. Eleanor felt a surge of power, not from anger, but from the truth she'd finally spoken. She wasn't just fighting for her house. She was fighting for herself, for the woman she'd been and still was. Michael stood, shoving the folder back into his briefcase. This isn't over, he said, but his voice lacked conviction. Laura and Tommy followed him out, their silence louder than any argument. As the door closed behind them, Eleanor exhaled, her hands trembling but her heart steady. She wasn't naive enough to think this was the end. Her children were stubborn, used to getting their way. But Eleanor had something they didn't: time. Time to plan, to strategize, to rebuild the life they'd tried to take from her. She spent the rest of the day at the community center, surrounded by Ruth, Harold, and Maria, who listened to every word of the confrontation with fierce pride. You showed them, Ellie, Maria said, squeezing her shoulder. They didn't expect you to fight back. I'm just getting started, Eleanor replied, a small smile breaking through. She wasn't sure what came next, but she knew one thing: she wasn't garbage. She was a mother, a widow, a survivor, and she'd make sure her children never forgot it. That night, Eleanor began writing letters not to her children, but to herself. Letters about who she was, what she'd endured, what she still hoped for. It was a way to reclaim her story, to remind herself that her worth wasn't tied to their approval. Each word was a step toward healing, a brick in the new foundation she was building. She didn't know how this fight would end, but she knew she'd face it on her terms. Eleanor's defiance grew stronger with each passing day. The confrontation with her children had lit a fire in her, one that burned away the self-doubt she'd carried for years. She wasn't just fighting to keep her home. She was reclaiming her place in the world. The community center became her anchor, a place where she could strategize and draw strength from those who saw her worth. Ruth, Harold, and Maria were more than friends, they were her chosen family. The ones who reminded her she was still whole. Harold took the lead on the legal front. He'd spent his career as a lawyer, and though retired, his mind was as sharp as ever. He helped Eleanor file a declaration of homestead, a legal protection that made it harder for anyone to force the sale of her property. He also connected her with a pro bono attorney who specialized in elder law, ensuring her will and assets were ironclad. They'll have to go through a mountain of paperwork to touch this house, Harold said, his eyes twinkling with mischief. And I'll make sure every page is a nightmare. Maria, meanwhile, focused on Eleanor's well-being. She arranged for a home health aide to visit twice a week, not because Eleanor couldn't manage, but to ease her physical burdens and give her more energy for the fight. Maria also introduced her to a local support group for seniors facing family estrangement. There, Eleanor found others who'd been discarded by their own children, their stories echoing her own. The group became a safe haven, a place to share her pain and her plans without judgment. Ruth was the heart of the operation, always ready with a cup of tea and a plan. She suggested Eleanor turn her home into a community space, a way to protect it by giving it purpose. You've got all this space, Ruth said one afternoon, gesturing to the sprawling backyard. Why not open it up? Host classes, gardening clubs, book groups. Make it untouchable by showing it's not just yours, it's the neighborhood's. The idea struck a chord. Eleanor had always loved bringing people together, whether through her knitting classes or holiday dinners. She began small, hosting a weekly book club in her living room. Neighbors she hadn't seen in years showed up, their faces lighting up as they stepped into the house, filled with memories. Soon, the backyard became a community garden, with kids from the block planting tomatoes and retirees tending roses. The house, once silent, hummed with life again. But Eleanor hadn't forgotten her children. She knew they'd come back, likely with a new tactic. Sure enough, 2 weeks after the confrontation, Laura called. Her voice was softer this time, almost pleading. Mom, we're worried about you. Can we just talk? No pressure. I promise. Eleanor agreed, but she set the terms. They'd meet at the community center, not her home. She wanted neutral ground, and she wanted witnesses. When Michael, Laura, and Tommy arrived, they were visibly uncomfortable, surrounded by Eleanor's friends and neighbors. The center was bustling, with kids running through the halls and seniors laughing over card games. It was a stark contrast to the sterile facility they'd tried to push her into. We just want what's best for you, Laura said, her hands fidgeting. We thought maybe we rushed things last time. You didn't rush, Eleanor said, her voice calm but firm. You decided for me. You didn't ask what I wanted, what I needed. You saw me as a burden, not a mother. Michael bristled. That's not fair. Mom, we're trying to help. Are you? Eleanor leaned forward, her eyes locked on his. Because helping doesn't look like selling my home behind my back. It doesn't look like ignoring me for years until you need something. Tommy spoke up, his voice quieter than usual. I didn't mean to hurt you, Mom. I got caught up in my own stuff. Eleanor's heart softened at his words, but she didn't let it show. I know you did, Tommy, but that doesn't erase what you've done. All of you. She paused, letting her words sink in. I've spent my life giving to you. Now I'm giving to myself. This house, this life, it's mine, and I'm sharing it with people who see me. The conversation ended without resolution. But Eleanor felt a weight lift. She'd said what needed saying, and she'd done it surrounded by people who cared. Her children left, their faces a mix of guilt and frustration. But Eleanor didn't dwell on it. She had a book club to host, a garden to tend, a life to live. That night, she sat in her armchair, a notebook in her lap. She'd started writing again, not just letters to herself, but stories of her childhood, her marriage, her struggles. They were for her, but also for the community she was building. She wanted them to know who she was, not just as a mother or a widow, but as Eleanor Grayson, a woman who'd faced betrayal and come out stronger. The spark of defiance had become a flame, and the flame was now a fire. Eleanor wasn't just surviving, she was thriving. And she wasn't done yet. Months passed, and Eleanor's home became a beacon in the neighborhood. The community garden flourished, with rows of vegetables and flowers tended by hands young and old. Her book club grew, spilling into the dining room and sometimes the porch, where voices mingled with laughter and the clink of teacups. She started a knitting circle, teaching kids and retirees alike to create scarves and blankets for local shelters. The house, once a mausoleum of memories, was alive again, filled with purpose and connection. Eleanor's children, however, remained a shadow over her progress. They hadn't given up on selling the house, though their approach had shifted. Michael sent emails with helpful articles about senior living. Laura dropped by unannounced, offering half-hearted apologies and promises to visit more. Tommy sent a single text, "I'm sorry, Mom. Can we talk?" Eleanor responded politely but kept her distance. She wasn't ready to forgive, not when their actions still spoke louder than their words. Her resolve was tested one crisp autumn morning when Michael showed up alone, his face drawn and tired. He stood on her porch, hands in his pockets, looking less like the confident man who demanded she sell and more like a son who didn't know what to say. "Can I come in?" he asked, his voice softer than she'd ever heard it. Eleanor hesitated, then stepped aside. They sat in the living room, the sounds of the garden filtering through the open window. Michael glanced around, taking in the new life in the house, the books stacked on the coffee table, the yarn baskets by the couch, the photos of community events pinned to a corkboard. "This place looks different," he said, almost to himself. "It is different," Eleanor replied. "It's mine again. Not just a house, but a home. For me. For the people who care." Michael rubbed his face, his shoulders slumping. "I didn't realize. I thought we were doing the right thing. The house. The facility, it seemed practical." "Practical for you," Eleanor said, her voice steady but not unkind. "Not for me. You didn't ask what I wanted. You decided I was done living." He winced, and for the first time, Eleanor saw a crack in his armor. "I've been a lousy son," he admitted. "We all have. I got caught up in my own life work. Kids. Bills. I thought you'd be better off somewhere else." Eleanor leaned forward, her eyes searching his. "Better off without my home. Without my memories. You thought I'd be better off forgotten." Michael didn't answer, but his silence was answer enough. Eleanor felt a pang of sorrow, not just for herself, but for him. He was her son, and somewhere beneath the selfishness was the boy she'd raised. But that boy was buried deep, and she couldn't dig him out alone. "I'm not selling," she said finally, "and I'm not moving. But I'm not closing the door on you, Michael, or Laura, or Tommy. If you want to be part of my life, you have to show it. Not with words, but with actions." Michael nodded, his eyes glistening. "I don't know how to fix this," he said. "Start by listening," Eleanor said. "Start by seeing me." He left soon after, promising to think about what she'd said. Eleanor didn't know if he'd follow through, but she felt lighter. She'd drawn a line, not out of anger, but out of self-respect. She was done being invisible. The community center remained her refuge. Ruth, Harold, and Maria celebrated her strength, but they also reminded her to protect herself. They might come around, Maria said one evening, but don't let your guard down. You've built something beautiful here. Don't let them take it. Eleanor took their advice to heart. She worked with Harold to establish a trust, ensuring her home would pass to the community center if anything happened to her. It was a way to protect her legacy, to ensure her house remained a place of connection long after she was gone. She also started recording her stories, not just in writing, but on tape, her voice steady as she recounted her life for anyone who'd listen. One afternoon, as she tended the garden with a group of kids, Laura showed up. She stood at the edge of the yard, watching as Eleanor laughed with a young girl over a misshapen carrot. For a moment, Eleanor saw a flicker of the daughter she'd known, the one who'd clung to her after nightmares, who'd begged for stories at bedtime. But that flicker wasn't enough. "Mom," Laura said, approaching slowly. This is amazing. I didn't know you were doing all this." Eleanor straightened, brushing dirt from her hands. "There's a lot you don't know, Laura. You haven't asked." Laura's face fell, but she nodded. "I want to try," she said. "I want to be better." Eleanor didn't respond right away. She wanted to believe her, but trust was a fragile thing, and hers had been broken too many times. "Then show me," she said simply. "Be here. Not just today, but tomorrow, and the day after." Laura stayed for the afternoon, helping in the garden, her hands clumsy but willing. It was a start, small and uncertain, but a start. Eleanor didn't know if her children would ever fully understand the pain they'd caused, but she was done waiting for their approval. She had a life to live, a community to nurture, a story to tell, and she was telling it, one day at a time. A year later, Eleanor's home was unrecognizable not in its structure, but in its spirit. The community garden had expanded, with a small greenhouse funded by local donations. The book club had grown into a storytelling circle, where seniors and kids shared tales of their lives. Eleanor's knitting classes had produced enough blankets to fill 2 shelters, and her recorded stories were played at the community center, inspiring others to share their own. The house wasn't just hers anymore. It was a living, breathing part of the neighborhood, a testament to what resilience and love could build. Her children's journey back to her was slower. Messier. Laura started showing up regularly, not just for visits, but to help with the garden or sit in on the book club. She listened more, asked questions, and once, tearfully, apologized for the years she'd taken Eleanor for granted. It wasn't perfect, but it was progress. Tommy called more often, his conversations halting but genuine. He even sent a check to repay part of the loan, a gesture that meant more to Eleanor than the money itself. Michael was the slowest to change, his pride a stubborn barrier. But even he began to soften, joining Laura for a garden day and staying for dinner. Eleanor didn't forgive easily, but she didn't close the door either. She'd learned that forgiveness wasn't about erasing the past, but about choosing how to carry it. Her children had treated her like garbage, discarding her when she no longer fit their plans. But in standing up to them, in rebuilding her life, she'd shown the man herself that she was anything but disposable. One spring evening, Eleanor stood in her backyard, surrounded by blooming roses and the laughter of kids chasing fireflies. Ruth was there, sipping tea, while Harold argued with Maria over a crossword clue. Laura was nearby, helping a young boy plant a sunflower. For the first time in years, Eleanor felt whole, not because her children had returned, but because she'd found herself. She thought of George, of the life they'd built together, and the promise she'd made to keep going. No matter what. She'd kept that promise. Not just for him, but for herself. The house, the garden, the community, they were her legacy. Proof that even when the world tried to break you, you could build something new. Eleanor's story wasn't over. There were still battles to fight, moments of doubt to face. But she was ready. She'd taken the pain her children had inflicted and turned it into something beautiful, something lasting. They'd treated her like trash, but she'd shown them what treasure she truly was. As the sun set, casting a golden glow over the garden, Eleanor smiled. She wasn't just surviving, she was thriving. And no one, not even her own children, could take that from her. Her home, her heart, her life, they were hers, reclaimed and radiant. A testament to the woman who refused to be discarded.